Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when someone discovers a truth too big to ignore, but too dangerous to say out loud? What if I told you that sometimes those who speak the truth are not applauded, they are destroyed? This story is not about a superhero. It is about an ordinary woman like you or me who made a choice that few would have the courage to make, not to keep quiet. And because of that, she lost everything. Amanda was just another employee among hundreds in a billion-dollar company. Silent, efficient, respected. Until she discovered a hidden secret that put lives at risk. She tried to ignore it. She tried to disappear, but it was too late. The system had caught her scent, and when the system feels threatened, it attacks. What Amanda faced was more than pressure. It was persecution, blackmail, sabotage, and an attack that almost cost her life. But what she did next was what changed everything. Because this story isn't just about corporate secrets. It's about moral courage, about knowing too much and still choosing to do the right thing. And that's why you need to watch it until the end. Because maybe, deep down, this story is less about her and more about who you choose to be when the world tries to silence you. Amanda Collins was the kind of person many people admired in silence. A data analyst in her early 30s, she dressed discreetly, arrived early, met deadlines rigorously, and always had a kind word on the tip of her tongue. Nothing in her routine drew attention, and perhaps that's why she had never realized how much she carried her rare gift, the combination of intelligence, ethics, and sensitivity. There was an unassuming sincerity about her, a natural humility, and a way of dealing with colleagues that exuded respect and empathy. Working at the headquarters of Theragen, one of the giants of the pharmaceutical industry in Chicago, seemed like the culmination of a silent but solid trajectory. Amanda never sought the spotlight, nor did she dream of big jobs. She liked to understand patterns, cross-reference data, and deliver solutions. She was an analytical mind, yes, but with the heart of someone who still believes in the power of kindness and collaboration. However, even the most stable routines hide adventures that life prepares without warning. And on that ordinary night, everything changed. It was almost by chance. Amanda stayed late at the office, as she did from time to time, taking advantage of the silence to finish a report. The corridors were already empty. The low light from the lamp on the desk and a cup of cold tea kept her company. When she opened a temporary folder with clinical trial files, she came across something that seemed out of the ordinary. A spreadsheet, hidden among efficacy graphs, revealed disturbing results, serious side effects, inconsistent data, and worst of all, what seemed to be deliberate statistical manipulation. Her heart raced. It was as if a thick fog invaded the air around her. There, in that moment, Amanda realized she had seen something she shouldn't have. Her mind tried to rationalize. It must be a typo, a preliminary test, something irrelevant. But her instinct, that instinct that comes from emotional intelligence, said otherwise. It said she had touched a deep wound. A wound covered by silence, fear, and money. And when the truth starts to hurt, silence becomes a threat. At that moment, Amanda had a choice: pretend she hadn't seen anything and carry on with her predictable life, or investigate, even knowing that it could cost her everything. Most people would probably opt for their comfort zone, and no one would blame them for that. After all, who wants to face a powerful structure surrounded by billionaire interests? But there was something in Amanda that wouldn't allow her to ignore what was hurting her conscience. Understanding the human impact of that data, real lives behind the statistics, planted a deep uneasiness in her. It was as if an inner voice said, "You saw it. Now you have responsibility." And that responsibility began to grow inside her, fueled by a sense of justice, by compassion, by an almost naive hope that there is still room for truth in the corporate world. At that point, she still didn't know the size of the avalanche she had unleashed. But one thing was certain: What seemed to be just another spreadsheet was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would place her before the most dangerous dilemma of her life. The days that followed were a brutal test of Amanda's sanity and sense of reality. The routine, once welcoming in its predictability, had become a minefield of uncertainty. She sat at the same desk, opened the same reports, drank the same coffee. But everything seemed different. The silence now weighed heavily. The glances seemed longer. And above all, her own mind struggled to find a solution. She tried to convince herself that she had misinterpreted, that perhaps the data was out of context. But the more she reread the spreadsheet, the more her conscience ached. Her emotional intelligence no longer allowed denial. What she saw was not a mistake, it was a cover-up. And not just any mistake, it was of frightening proportions. The company was hiding information from patients, omitting serious side effects. To know this and remain silent would be to betray her own values, her humanity. And that was eating away at her. Amanda began to investigate discreetly. Every lunch hour, every sleepless night, she cross-referenced data, consulted articles, and looked for connections. Her perspicacity, now her greatest ally, revealed patterns that would have gone unnoticed before. She began saving copies on an encrypted flash drive, which she hid in the plant in her living room. She didn't tell anyone, not even her sister, with whom she had shared secrets since childhood. Fear was already present, and loneliness too. Because when you discover something too big, your instinct is to protect the ones you love. And in silence, Amanda began to carry that weight alone. It was no longer just an ethical issue. It was a matter of survival. But at the same time, something inside her flourished. Courage. The courage to do the right thing, even without a guarantee of victory. She knew that the easiest choice was to turn her back. But she also knew that nothing great is built without risk, without initiative, without altruism. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized that she was not alone in this story. There were signs. Small, almost imperceptible, but they set off internal alerts. Her computer began to show strange glitches. Documents she had saved disappeared or returned altered. Trusted colleagues began to avoid her. The occasional conversation was interrupted with uncomfortable looks. Paranoia mixed with facts, making it difficult to separate imagination from reality. But Amanda was observant. She knew that when the system begins to perceive you as a threat, it disguises itself as normal until the last second. She felt she was being watched. Still, she persevered. Because hope, however fragile it seemed, remained alive. It was faith in truth, in justice, in the possibility of inspiring change. With each click, with each discovery, she found herself more involved. But she had no idea that, while she was searching for answers, she had already been noticed. And soon, a direct warning would change everything. The morning was gray in Chicago when Amanda went down to the company's underground parking lot. She was carrying her backpack in her hands and a growing doubt in her chest. She was no longer sleeping well, eating little, and her gaze was more focused on corners and shadows. As she approached her car, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine, a folded note under the windshield wiper. The paper was wet from the fog, but the handwriting was clear, direct, threatening. Be careful what you look for. It's none of your business. Amanda froze. It was the first direct blow. The first unmistakable sign that someone knew. Fear tightened her chest. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had cracked. But along with the fear, a brute force emerged. The certainty that she was on the right path. Because only those who have something to hide threaten. And at that moment, she understood that she had entered a dangerous game where the only rule was to survive. The note was kept in silence, like valuable evidence. Amanda knew that reporting required more than courage. It required strategy, intelligence, and a very balanced trust. She then decided to use the company's anonymous reporting channels, ethical hotlines that promised absolute confidentiality. But what she discovered soon after made her tremble more than the note. Her internal accesses were temporarily blocked, and her browsing history was reset, as if someone had broken into her personal system. The feeling was clear. There was someone inside the company itself ensuring that silence prevailed. Amanda tried to look for external alternatives, but even emails she sent from private accounts seemed to disappear. It was as if she were screaming in a desert, alone, completely alone. The feeling of helplessness mixed with indignation, because knowing too much is a burden, but being silenced is an attack on your own identity. Still, she did not back down. Fear still lived in her body, but now it was accompanied by resilience and the certainty that the truth could not be buried. Amanda started walking around with her cell phone turned off, avoided repeating routes, and started keeping notes in random places, inside books, in her gym bag, even between the linings of her clothes. Her emotional intelligence, combined with her perspicacity, became her shield. She knew she could trust no one. And as difficult as it was, she understood that it was time to act coolly, with innovation, but without losing her humanity. She needed an ally outside of that contaminated universe. Someone who was willing to listen without judgment. Someone who understood the gravity of everything. And it was then, on a silent night, looking at an old photo kept in the back of a drawer, that the past turned on a light at the end of the tunnel. Perhaps Noah was the only solution. His name was Noah, an investigative journalist known for his keen eye and ethical stubbornness. But for Amanda, he was more than that. He was part of an old story, one of those that life keeps in a corner of the memory with affection and a little pain. They had loved each other, yes, but their different paths and their intensity had eventually driven them apart. Still, there was a rare quality in him, trustworthiness. Amanda hesitated, but knew she needed someone outside the system. She picked up the phone, dialed her old number, and waited. On the other end of the line, the same voice. Surprise, silence, and then a high, loaded with the past. Amanda wasted no time. She was direct, sincere, and in a whisper explained that she needed help. Noah heard everything, every word, every pause. In the end, he said simply, "If this is real, you're already in danger." It was the beginning of a collaboration marked by tension, reconciliation, and a sense of purpose greater than old wounds. The reunion was discreet, in a cafe far from the city. Noah arrived with his inseparable recorder in his pocket and a suspicious look. Amanda, with a haggard face and a soul full of fear, handed him the flash drive. As he opened the files, he kept a neutral expression for a few seconds, but then his eyes changed. His expression hardened. He understood immediately. This was big, very big, and dangerous. Noah was not naive. He knew that messing with the pharmaceutical sector was like poking a hornet's nest. But he was also driven by an almost stubborn passion for the truth. There, sitting face to face with Amanda, he realized something deeper. She was no longer the woman he had met years ago. She was stronger, more determined, and she was willing to face anything. That touched him. His sense of justice was echoed by her courage. And it was in this reunion that something more powerful began to emerge. An alliance between two worlds that rarely meet, that of cold data and that of human stories. From that day on, Noah became not only a confidant, but also a strategist. Together, they mapped out routes, defined steps, and thought about how and when to release the documents. Amanda, for the first time in weeks, felt a timid relief. Loneliness was starting to give way to collaboration, and this renewed her hope. But Noah was clear. You're going to be the target, and they won't play around. The phrase echoed in her mind for days. Still, she stood firm. She had someone by her side who understood the game, who knew where to step. And although fear still lived in her heart, now there was also confidence. Amanda understood that life is made up of unexpected reunions. And sometimes, it's the past that brings the solution that the present needs. But what she didn't imagine was that, by exposing the truth, her enemies would come out of the shadows and begin to act with ferocity. What was once silent paranoia became undeniable reality. Amanda began to notice the signs more clearly. A black car frequently parked near the building, unknown figures in the vicinity, discreet movements of those who seemed more interested in her than in the surroundings. Noah, with his field experience, confirmed her suspicions. They're monitoring you. From now on, you can't be too careful. Amanda changed her routines, took different routes, turned off her cell phone for long periods of time, and started using secure networks for any communication. But the fear was visceral, a fear that chilled her spine and made her stomach churn, because it was no longer just about her. Her sister received an anonymous call. A male voice, short and direct. "Tell Amanda to stop." That was a turning point. The stalking had crossed the professional line. It was personal, it was dirty. And Amanda felt the weight of it all, the courage to continue, and the risk of not returning. Her home, once a refuge, had become hostile territory. Some nights when she entered, she noticed subtle changes. Pictures slightly out of place, lights that she had left off were on, drawers rummaged through. Nothing was taken, nothing was left. But the message was clear: we're in. Noah suggested that she leave in for a while. Amanda began sleeping in makeshift places, the house of a distant friend, a room rented under a false name. The persecution was psychological, strategic, designed to destabilize. Still, she resisted. She knew it wasn't just about her. It was about the patients omitted from the spreadsheets, the manipulated reports, the silenced voices. With each step, she understood more and more the price of truth. And even in the face of fear, she felt something rare grow: gratitude. Gratitude for having survived this far, for having Noah by her side, for still being lucid. Because in times of hunting, maintaining sanity is an act of rebellion. At work, the siege was more subtle and even more cruel. Amanda began to be treated with distance, as if something invisible separated her from the others. Meetings from which she was excluded, projects taken from her hands, looks filled with judgment. She realized that the system was not just reacting, it was adapting, eliminating her threats in silence. The company, until then an environment of collaboration and apparent respect, now showed its true face: cold, controlling, ruthless. It was power disguising itself as structure. Amanda understood that she was on an adventure where there were no guarantees. But perseverance, fueled by compassion and the truth she carried, kept her from backing down. The world needed to know. She had nowhere else to run, and yet she chose not to stop. Because there are times in life when moving forward is not an option, it is a mission. And the more they pressed, the more she knew that she was about to touch the exposed nerve of a machine much bigger than she imagined. Amanda and Noah had come up with a detailed plan: gather evidence, organize the documents chronologically, and deliver everything, exclusively, to a network of independent journalists with national credibility. It was the turning point. Everything was ready. The material was duly encrypted and stored in multiple clouds. The contacts were prepared. The impact was calculated. But like a piece of machinery moved by invisible hands, someone acted first. In the middle of the night, while Amanda was sleeping in a rented apartment, an anonymous email was sent to the company. The content was a truncated and manipulated version of the same documents she intended to release, but with changes that suggested invasion, theft, and bad faith. In the morning, the bombshell went off. Amanda was called to the HR office, escorted by 2 security guards. Accused of stealing confidential information, her contract was summarily terminated. She left the company with a box in her arms and her heart in pieces. The system, cruel and perceptive, had reversed the roles. Now she was the villain of the story. The media was quick to act. News stories appeared depicting Amanda as a resentful, unstable former employee, unhappy with her dismissal and willing to do anything to get revenge on the company. Tabloid outlets explored images of her on discreet outings. Headlines described her as former analyst investigated for corporate espionage. Amanda saw her reputation crumble in real time. Old friends disappeared. Contacts fell silent. Her family began to receive dirty looks in the neighborhood. Even the bakery on the corner where she was called by name now offered an embarrassing silence. It was the public destruction of an identity built with years of work, honesty, and respect. And what hurt the most was the understanding that it had all been premeditated. It was a sophisticated trap, fueled by fear, sustained by manipulation, and legitimized by silence. Amanda didn't just lose her job. She lost her image. She lost her ground. But she didn't lose her essence. Noah tried to contain the damage. She called contacts, denied reports, and published a scathing article with verified excerpts from the original material. But the damage had already been done. Amanda, now marked, could not move without feeling the weight of others' eyes. Even those closest to her hesitated. Is it true? As if one doubt was enough to invalidate an entire life of integrity. And it was there, between tears and sleepless nights, that Amanda faced the darkest point of her journey. Isolated, without institutional support, living off her own financial reserves, she was forced to face the ultimate dilemma: give up or start over from scratch. But giving up had never been part of her nature. She knew she was not perfect, but she was honest. She knew she was hurt, but still alive. And in that breath of lucidity, she found the strength to get up. Because sometimes, rock bottom is the only place where you can find momentum, and Amanda still had a lot to say. The silence that followed was the most deafening of all. Amanda now lived in a small rented apartment, with bare walls, a mattress on the floor, and a pile of folders stacked up like a wall of resistance. The phone rarely rang. Social media had been deactivated, and the days dragged on between bitter coffees, suppressed tears, and memories of a life that seemed to no longer belong to her. Depression arrived slowly but surely, like a thick fog that covered even the simplest thoughts. There were times when she simply stopped and stared into the void, wondering if it still made sense to continue. But paradoxically, it was at this breaking point that Amanda rediscovered her essence. Between one sleepless night and another, something deep inside her reminded her of the people she had sworn to protect. Of the anonymous patients, the erased data, the silenced voices. And there, in the heart of pain, was born the bravest of decisions: to continue, without structure, without media, without legal support. Amanda began to act with what she had: time, intelligence, and above all, courage. She gathered excerpts from documents that had survived the siege, cross-referenced them with public sources, and began sending this information, carefully verified, to independent journalists, investigative content platforms, and anonymous profiles that campaigned for justice. Little by little, small portals began to publish data that matched her accounts. Nothing explosive yet, but enough to reignite a spark. The narrative began to change. Comments appeared. People shared. Questions resurfaced. Amanda, even though she was hurt, felt that she was getting back into the game. And this time, with her soul shielded by pain and resilience. Because when the only alternative is to stop or move forward, there are those who find a path in the chaos. And Amanda, with her sharp perseverance, followed this path, step by step, document by document, with the faith of someone who knows that a truth, even in whispers, can still change the world. Noah came to her aid again, now more as a silent ally than as a public voice. Together, they set up a network of safe contacts, began meeting in remote cafes, and exchanged information through handwritten notes. It was no longer a denunciation. It was an information war against a deeply corrupt structure. Amanda relearned how to trust, how to collaborate with those who shared the same purpose. And it was in this reunion with solidarity, with collective emotional intelligence, that she recovered what she needed most: hope. A hope that was not at all romantic, mind you. It was one of those hard-earned practices built with each small step forward. Like a footnote story that goes viral, an email of support from a stranger, a journalist willing to listen without judging. And then, Amanda understood that, even though she had lost everything, she still had something that the corrupt could never steal: her voice. And what she didn't know was that this voice would soon echo louder than she had ever dared to imagine. Day was set. Amanda would be interviewed live by an independent journalist with a large digital reach. The topic was explosive. What's behind Theragen's secret tests? Behind the scenes, the tension was almost physical. Amanda knew that by publicly exposing everything she knew, there would be no turning back. It would be her last card. Noah accompanied her, attentive to every detail, while the team prepared the equipment. But fate had other plans. As she left home that morning, Amanda noticed something strange in the car. The engine seemed to hesitate, but as usual, she tried to ignore it. A few blocks from the station, it all happened. A bang, a violent spin, and then absolute silence. Amanda woke up hours later, with pain in every bone and disconnected flashes of sirens, voices, and red lights. The hospital verdict: sabotage of the braking system. It was an attack. A brutal attack. And the truth, which had previously been whispered, now screamed from the rooftops. The news spread quickly. Whistleblower involved in suspicious accident hours before interview. The country, still skeptical, turned its eyes to Amanda. The newspapers began to dig. The public, previously asleep, began to question. And as always happens when violence is explicit, the commotion became fuel. Amanda, even immobilized in the hospital, was interviewed on video. The bruises could not hide the determination in her eyes. I tried to warn. They tried to silence me. But now everyone wants to know why. That was the phrase that echoed on the networks. In a few days, thousands of people began to follow the case, demanding explanations from the company, demanding an investigation. The attempt to silence turned against its perpetrators. And Amanda, even physically fragile, became a symbol of resistance. Her pain, now public, was also a cry for justice. The humanity that she maintained in each decision, even in the worst moments, touched people in an almost spiritual way. Because there was no heroine there. There was an ordinary woman, doing what was right. During the months of recovery, Amanda remained steadfast, relearning how to walk, relearning how to breathe without pain, but also relearning how to believe. Every day, she received letters, messages, and simple gifts. Children sent drawings. Students wrote texts about moral courage. Honest doctors revealed new data. The wave was irreversible. Hope had spread throughout society. Noah, with the support of other journalists, put together a final dossier. All the pieces were there. And when he saw Amanda in the hospital bed, with her body bruised but her spirit intact, he understood. The truth had already won. Now there was only one thing left: to tell everything. And what would come next would be more impactful than anyone could have predicted. The publication came as a controlled explosion. Noah, together with a team of investigative journalists and data forensics technicians, released the dossier on an independent platform with documentary evidence manipulated. Reports, internal Theragen emails, and compromising videos. Within hours, the website went offline due to excessive traffic. Social media went up in flames. Hashtags emerged. Debates were held during prime time. And the nation's eyes turned to the accusation that Amanda had been making alone for months. The content was unquestionable. Hidden deaths, patients used as guinea pigs, tests without consent, manipulation of statistics, and secret agreements with health authorities. The indignation turned into a social movement. Protests began to pop up in several cities. The truth was finally becoming public. And with it came a collective feeling of understanding, solidarity, anger, but also hope. In less than a week, the government opened a federal investigation. Theragen executives were summoned. Some tried to flee, others deleted files, but the pressure was overwhelming. The population wanted justice. Congress set up a CPI. Old accusations were reopened. Other former employees found the courage to speak out. Amanda, still in the process of rehabilitation, was called to testify. Sitting in front of the cameras, her voice trembling but her gaze firm, she said, "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I couldn't sleep knowing that innocent people were dying." The phrase became a headline, a t-shirt, a college mural. The woman who had been treated as a traitor was now seen as a symbol of integrity, altruism, and resilience. Her journey, marked by deep pain, took on the contours of justice, but not without consequences. The truth, even if liberating, exacts its price, and Amanda had paid too dearly. Despite the victory, the emotional impact was immense. Amanda had lost friendships, opportunities. Her career was tarnished by hasty judgments, and her body still bore the physical marks of the attack. But something had changed, something much deeper. She had found her voice again, her courage, her mission. And even with open wounds, she now walked with the serenity of someone who not only survived, but overcame with dignity. Noah, standing beside her, saw something rare in her: wisdom built from pain, compassion rooted in experience, and a kindness that only those who have faced darkness can maintain. Amanda was no longer a data analyst. She was now a moral force. A woman who had taken on the system and with intelligence and perseverance exposed the truth. And there was more to come. Because when you plant justice, the harvest usually comes in the form of transformation. Amanda never went back to being who she was before, and perhaps that was the greatest gift disguised as a tragedy. After all that, she decided to move to another city. She traded the skyscrapers for a quiet neighborhood on the East Coast, where the sound of the sea helped to heal the invisible wounds. But she did not choose anonymity. Quite the opposite. She began a new journey. She became a speaker, a mentor, a silent activist for ethical causes. In every auditorium, every school, every forum where she spoke, there was something sacred in her words. Not because she spoke beautifully, but because she spoke truthfully. With the voice of someone who saw the shadow up close and still chose the light. Amanda would say, "I knew too much." But pretending not to know would have been the real mistake. And it was impossible to hear that without feeling a lump in your throat. Her story began to inspire young professionals, beginning journalists, ethics students, because she proved with her own body that moral courage is not a virtue, it is a daily choice. Over the months, Amanda published a book. Vose's Coladas became an instant bestseller. The book brought together her journey, reflections on social responsibility, and anonymous accounts of people who, like her, paid dearly for telling the truth. The impact was immediate. Schools adopted the book as mandatory reading. Companies began inviting her to rethink codes of conduct. Even politicians cited her speeches at public hearings. Amanda, now a symbol of overcoming obstacles and emotional intelligence, knew that there was a lot to do. But she did it with ease, not with anger, because she understood that wisdom is born from digested pain, and that forgiveness, even if it is not forgetting, is the only path to healing. She did not forget what she suffered, but she also did not allow it to define her future. She went further. She transformed loneliness into connection, insecurity into insight, injustice into a mission. And above all, she kept the flame of hope alive because she knew that there were still many voices waiting for the courage to speak. At the meeting she hosted, Amanda liked to look the audience in the eye and ask a disconcerting question. And you? What do you do when you discover an uncomfortable truth? It was as if, at that moment, each person was invited to see themselves in her. The ordinary woman who decided not to keep quiet. The woman who knew too much and paid dearly for it. But also the woman who stood up again, who chose to move on, who opted for humanity, for understanding, for affection, even in the midst of inhumanity. Amanda knew that she would not change the world alone. But she also knew that all it took was a spark to light fires of transformation. She had been that spark. And now she continued to multiply lights, because, in the end, the only ones who change the world are those who are willing to face it, even if it costs everything. And what the future would bring for Amanda started right there. Now that you know Amanda's story, tell me, what would you do in her place? Would you pretend you didn't see anything? Would you hide in comfortable silence? Or would you have the courage to face an entire system, knowing that you could lose everything? Uncomfortable truths require courageous decisions. And the question that remains is, are you prepared to do the right thing, even when no one is applauding? This story is not just a tale of overcoming. It is a mirror, an invitation, a provocation. How many times have you had the chance to act honestly and held back out of fear? What if you could be the spark that changes the environment where you live, your work, your family, your community? Isn't it time to get out of automatic mode and take on the role of protagonist of your own story? If this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below what impacted you the most. And of course, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, because we still have many real stories to tell. Stories that inspire, that touch the soul, that awaken the best in us. Because, in the end, change begins with those who have the courage to not remain silent.